I'm John Goodell. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Curator here at the Archives of Falconry, and welcome to Ask the Curator. I thought I'd share with you two collections. One is from artist Robert Widmeyer, and the other is from John and Frank Craighead, and it's their diary and a film that they produced. And both of these, the connection between these two items are that they were U.S. falconers visiting India in the 1940s and recording falconry in India at a time just before really the collapse of falconry in India, the partition of 1947, and really this critical moment in time when they were able to observe falconry under the Raj and really dynamic, incredible way of life. And it really represents also this incredible drive all falconers have to an enthusiasm to learn from others and to get new knowledge. And it seems like all falconers around the world have one thing in common, is that if they find someone or a book or a diary or photos or a film that can give them new information, they're going to seek that out. And in this case, during a war-torn world, all of these individuals really worked really hard to learn from falconry of all places in India, and at a time when U.S. falconers really had limited information. They had some books from English language books that were from Great Britain, but even falconry in Great Britain had been in some decline for a century or more. And just a few years previous, the Mullen family had really stopped producing falconry equipment and in the Netherlands, and so the supply of either trapped birds or equipment had declined. And so this was a critical injection into the knowledge base of U.S. falconers. So the first collection I'm going to show you a very small segment of the Robert Widmeyer collection, and he was a professional artist who was served in the military in the Army in India between 1942 and 1944, and he was assigned to in the U.S. Army as a sergeant. He was assigned to India, and he was actually a public relations officer for the 10th U.S. Air Force, which is the predecessor to the Air Force as its own branch. And he really took upon himself to really spend most of his time as a public relations officer exploring and learning about falconry in India. And what I really appreciate about his work is that while he did do portraits of birds and traditional art like many falconers do of raptors, he took very much a documentary style approach to his art, sketches of the life of a falconer in India. And it's a really rich collection. We have over 100 pieces of his art, including drawings and paintings, watercolors. Here's one example of a portrait of a sparrowhawk in India, and it shows the bird on a perch with some of the equipment that he observed there. And he was always pretty good about recording these details. So while his artwork isn't necessarily really the fine sort of art of birds that we might think of when we think of the Trete and these incredible prints by Wolf, they really are I really love them because of their documentary nature. And to that point, here is a Saker falcon, and it shows in a fair amount of detail the leash and the jest system of the Saker and the hood. He also did some really great portraits. Here's an Indian falconer holding what looks like a haggard peregrine or an adult peregrine with a red hood on. And some of his sketches are done with a pen and then colored later. Here's actually a sketch by the author of the author, and it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but he's dressed in local garb, and he's holding a haggard goshawk. Here's another great portrait of a falconer holding what looks like a passage goshawk, I think. He had some action scenes out hawking, and here's a great one of a Sikh falconer with a Saker falcon, and it really captures this moment when the horse is in motion and the falcon, which is hooded, baited. And so it's sort of lifting off the glove a little bit, but you can see in the painting or in the sketch that it's tied to the glove. But just a snapshot. And here's a great drawing of a falconer hunting partridge with a goshawk, and there's a halsband around the neck of the goshawk, and there's a dog, what looks like possibly a point, but a dog in action there. And that's certainly documenting the use of a dog in Indian falconry. And there's a stick. You can see this falconer has a beating stick. And then here's a great scene, maybe in town, and it's maybe even the artist himself holding what looks like a goshawk there and talking with a friend and sharing the hookah pipe on one of these cots. And you'll see many pictures and sketches of these cots being used both to sit on and also to man new hawks or falcons, where they tie them to this and put them out in a busy street. Here's another rendering of the cot and two falconers chatting, one with the hookah and another with a bird on the glove and another bird tied on the cot in the back. And it just gives you a great flavor for kind of the day in the life of Widmeyer. Here's one with some watercoloring in it, and it has an Indian falconer with a goshawk, a haggard goshawk, on his knee, leaning up against the wall with the hookah pipe on the left and a glove by his side. This is a really dramatic scene here. This is a cast of Saker falcons pursuing a gazelle, a small gazelle, and there's two mounted Indian falconers there on horseback in the background. And then here is a larger sketch of an Indian falconer training a new goshawk, and it's entitled The First Jump. Although he didn't do a lot of paintings, one painting here, which is a larger painting, is really a great scene that I think is meant to encapsulate the range of experiences that he had, or the range of falconry that he observed. And you have here two Indian falconers, one's on the ground, so sort of representing falconry from that point of view. And he's holding a haggard goshawk with one hand, and then he's got a cheetah leashed and holding that on his arm on the other. He's also holding a horse by the reins, and another falconer on the horse is holding an adult or haggard peregrine. And then above them in the sky here, you see two kites, which is a traditional quarry that a Saker falcon most commonly was used in a ringing flight. And you can see down here at the bottom are two Saker falcons. One's unhooded on a block perch, and the other is hooded. So to me, it's a representative of really this palette of diverse approaches to falconry, and really the extraordinary, represents what an extraordinary experience he would have had in India. And then over here are his diary and manuscript, and although we have many other items from Widmeyer, over 100 pieces of art and some more notes and a photo album, these are pretty interesting. This is the journal that was given to him by the military, and it's, my days in the service, which they were all printed with that, and then he wrote on the top falconry. So it's sort of, in some ways, you could say, my days in the service of falconry. And it's got a lot of great illustrations in it, and a lot of deep, very rich descriptions of what he observed there and hawking various species, and also some translations of falconry-related terminology. Here's a little illustration of hooding technique. And then his manuscript is a typed manuscript, which we think was really pulled off of his diary. And it's got a lot of great content in here, and in some ways is the kind of thing we should probably consider publishing. But here he has a typed description, in this case, the throwing of the shikra, and this is how they've been trained, to describing how Indian falconers train a shikra to sort of accept being held and thrown at quarry to give them a great advantage. There's a number of descriptions of trapping techniques, and to U.S. falconers at the time, this was all completely new. This was trapping techniques were an ancient mystery that U.S. falconers really may not have understood very well, and Widmeyer was able to document how the traps were made and how they were deployed. And he goes into great detail here in all of these elements. Here's some illustrations of equipment. And then he's showing how a falcon is jumped to the high fist or lure to condition it, which is a technique we call jump ups, but was a readily employed technique in India. Calling a bird to the glove or casting it off. Anyway, this was also in a sort of humorous, this is the paper he had, and so this booklet is actually a booklet used that he pulled off of the desk probably. On the top of every page it reads Headquarters U.S. Air Force in India and China, 10th U.S. Air Force. The next item is the Craigheads, and the John and Frank Craighead were two falconers and biologists, and they made a huge mark on both wildlife biology and falconry in the U.S. But as 19-year-olds, they were invited by an Indian prince to come observe falconry in India, and it was in response to an article they published in National Geographic where they took photos of raptors and they were hawking Cooper's hawks on cottontails. And so this Indian prince, Bappa here, who was a very accomplished falconer, invited them to India, and in 1940 they took a steamship to India and spent quite a bit of time over there, and they were given a grant by National Geographic and some film from Kodak. And so not only do we have this great book published by the archives with color photography documenting, this is their diaries of John and Frank Craighead in the time in India, and this is called Life with an Indian Prince. We also have their film, and their film is an extraordinary document of their time in India and really high-level falconry. If we just relied on Widmeyer's artistry, you know, it's wonderful, but you might almost look at some of it in disbelief in some cases, but it's actually on film in the Craigheads film, and it's a really, for two 19-year-olds to pull off the footage they did in 1940-41 is incredible. And so you can read about their time there with the Indian prince in great detail in this book. They talk about more than just falconry, but a lot of the cultural observations they made. They also saw the hunting using cheetahs to hunt black buck, which was an extraordinary thing to watch, and that's also in the film. And they saw. In India, they saw falconry, like Widmeyer, they saw falconry practice at this really high level. So they saw the type of flights that were described in old European text, like from the Loo Hawking Club, things that are described in the Traité de Falconnerie, the hawking of herons, ringing flights on herons with peregrines. This was really sort of something that had gone away. It was falconry that had essentially collapsed in Europe by the late 1800s. And so here are these young American falconers who had really only seen limited amounts of game hawking and limited amounts of techniques of training and trapping, were able to go to India and see the experts doing all manner of falconry, from trapping to manning to training to flying, not just simple flights of, say, goshawk or on a hare, but really dynamic flights of peregrines, ringing flights on herons, ringing flights on ibis, ringing flights of saker falcons on kites, and really powerful long-distance flights of goshawks on partridge.
Falcon strikes at the pigeon and hits the yielding net, which is almost invisible against the ground. The goshawk is flown to the hand instead of to a lure. This bird will be flown at partridge, and therefore it must be exercised rigorously to make it strong and swift on the wing. With only a week of training, yet notice how willingly she obeys Bappa. She must be exercised in this manner 40 or 50 times at each meal. The question is, who is getting the most exercise, the prince or the bird? But the real mass production training is carried on by Bappa's men under his supervision. These Saker falcons will be trained to fly at kite. They are receiving their daily exercises by flying to the glove. Each man is responsible for his own hawk. Then a common heron, the size of our great blue, is sighted, and a peregrine released for a ringing flight. Off they go, the heron climbing fast and the smaller falcon striving to get above. This is such a difficult flight that in medieval England, 2 falcons were always flown at a heron. We'll see if Bappa can do it with one. Finally, the falcon climbs above her quarry and stoops. She misses. They fly into the sun, and the falcon stoops, binds, and both birds drop to the earth. It is another victory for Bappa, and a performance any falconer might be proud of. We move on through the cultivated fields and along the euphorbia hedges looking for partridges. We find some, and Bappa throws a goshawk in pursuit. This straight-arm throw is known as a patola and gives the hawk a tremendous advantage. Another cheetah is prepared to run. Again, we approach a herd. Here the cheetah is filmed at normal speed. Bappa estimates their top speed at 80 miles an hour. Fortunately for us, the buck turns and runs towards us. In slow motion, both animals streak by, a study of 2 perfect runners in action. The cheetah trips his quarry and then attempts to get a stranglehold, while the buck fights valiantly and the trainers rush to aid the cheetah.
So taken together, both the Widmeyer collection and the Craighead diaries and film, to me represents, one, just an extraordinary document of falconry that is essentially of a bygone era. It's an incredible, just visually incredible document, an incredible documentation of really high-level falconry of its varied forms. The only thing really missing is eagle falconry. They were doing essentially every type of falconry that's been practiced in the world. And it represents this insatiable curiosity that falconers have to learn new information. And so these folks traveled a long distance and were able to make this cultural exchange with these really experienced falconers and bring that information back to the New World, which gave this incredible injection into North American falconry. And it represents this critical time in the world history where, during the World War II, where a lot of these old, ancient, cultural, iconic sports like falconry were in decline, and they were really hanging by a thread. And so these trips, and this, whether it be documenting through art, documenting through writing, or through film, really helped preserve a way of life that was on its way out in that region. And without this sort of documentation, we would have lost this incredible knowledge forever. And so really the final reason why I really value these collection items is that they really represent the reason why we have the Archives of Falconry, is that we, by collecting all manner of documentation and information about falconry practice around the world, we can, instead of falconry hanging by a thread in certain parts of the world, we can really bind these things together into a story that people can come here and explore, and really make sure that falconry and falconry heritage won't be lost in the future.